Okay, this is going to be a tutorial on how to import your own model into Skyrim to create a new monster. And this is something that will be attached to a skeleton that's already made. So a vanilla Skyrim skeleton, or well, a skeleton that's already in Skyrim somewhere, whether it be a DLC or vanilla Skyrim. Now I'm making this because it looks like all the tutorials out there on YouTube, strangely, except for, well, with respect to only monsters, are like completely bananas and incoherent. And there's a tutorial set for armor that's somewhat similar, that is cogent, but it doesn't really touch up on issues you might have troubleshooting issues with monster models in specific. So I'm assuming you know how well you have the basics down of Blender or 3ds Max or something to import your model. You already have your model ready to import. So the first thing you're going to do is open the vanilla file, the original monster that you're going to attach your own model to, I mean with respect to the skeleton. So open that and import the skeleton. So you should have import skeleton checked. So now you can go to your own model, and it's basically a model that's fresh out of any 3D modeling program. I mean, there's no processing in it. It's an OBJ, a 3ds, whatever. It's ready to be processed. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so then you just have to align and adjust your model and align it accordingly. I've already made mine, and you'll notice I made this one in a specific way so that the objects, the shapes here are basically created over or placed over some of the pieces of the original model. So if I hide this selection, you can see that's one piece, that's another piece. Okay, so that's if you're making a model on top of an original model. That's generally what you want to do. Now obviously it doesn't have to be completely perfect. The more accurate, the closer to the bones, the better, because then you don't have to do this nasty gritty work that we're going to see in a moment. So this is what you have now. What you're going to want to do is click on your model and go to skin wrap. Okay, and this, click face deformation and weight all points, and you're going to add the other guy, and you're clicking on the main body, not any peripheral models that came with it, right? So you have Storm Atronach here. Uncheck add, click convert to skin. So what you should see as a result is you should have the names of all the bones here in your own model. Now you can delete skin wrap, and what you do here, at this point you can delete the original, and you have your model, and effectively at this point you can just go to modifier list, BS dismember skin modifier. It's part of the NIF tools. Select all of your model and click and assign it to main body, and then you're done, right? Actually at this point, if your model is like, say you just barely changed the original vanilla and you're just trying to re-import it, at this point you can export it. However, if it doesn't have a material assigned, you need to go to material editor, go to make a new material. You can click the box next to diffuse to add a texture if needed. Bitmap, go to a texture, and that add a texture. Right, and then you hold left click and drag a texture on top of your model, and then you can export it. Right, so you would want to do that if you don't have a texture property on there, and the reason is because you open your exported model here, everything's set up with the bones. However, if you don't have BS lighting shader property or BS effect shader property ready, there may be a case where if you add a new block and do it yourself, or you change it and delete a block, it doesn't have to be any of the vertices, just some block, the hierarchy is modified, and then you save it again, that's going to break the animations, because somewhere in the system it's going to find that something has changed, and because NifScope doesn't properly save the hierarchy or something to that degree, it's going to break the animations. The animations won't work, and what you'll see is that you'll have a model without working animations. So the model is in the creation kit, but nothing's happening. So basically you have the material properties and the effects ready in 3ds Max, and then export them and then modify them. What you can do also is, if you forgot or changed it, you can just open that NIF file in 3ds Max, go through the same process of attaching the skeleton and then putting it back, saving it, then you can import in creation kit, and you should have animations again. Okay. So that's the first thing you need to take care of if you have not. So the next problem is actually that once you have this model in creation kit, you'll, with more complicated models, with ones that are not perfect, you'll have something like this. So the animations are working, but the vertices are all crazy. And the reason this happens is in this case, we have pieces of the model that are completely separate from the body. We only want one bone to affect them, because these bones are basically running around animating in different places. And when you have two bones that are connected to one shape, it's going to stretch out the shape, obviously, because they're in different origins. This is a pretty gritty process, nasty process that you have to take care of. So what you do is you're going to delete that BS property, and you're going to click Edit Envelopes. Now, select vertices, check that. And this little tool, you're going to have that open. You're going to need that. What's going to happen is you're going to see something like this, and this is basically the problem. This bone ought to be associated only with this shape. Okay, so you see that shape there. Basically, red means maximum force, blue means minimum force, right? And everything in between is a variation thereof, in between 0 and 1, basically. And of course, if there's no color, it means there's no influence. What you need to do is basically any vertex that is colored with respect to a bone that isn't supposed to be controlling that shape. Any such vertex needs to be cleared of any influence. So you can tell which bones control which areas generally by the origin of the bone. So right here you can see that the center is just about at the center of this skull, this shape here. That means that this bone ought to completely control this skull and nothing else, because it's a separate shape. And so what we have to do is select all of this area that is not part of the shape. Make sure you don't select anything else. And then click 0. Now, there might be a problem, which is that normalization is on. And basically, I think with respect to every bone, the force has to add up to 1, and so it enforces that normalization if you have that highlighted. Now you're going to have to fix this if you uncheck it eventually, but we have to in order to clear up the influence on other shapes. So you can see there, it completely removed it. Now you have to pay attention to the normalize. Sometimes it checks again with respect to a different vertex. So now we have to basically do this for every one. And you probably ought to prepare yourself, prepare your model for this, because if you don't, what you're going to have is basically, it's more painstaking than it needs to be. Okay. So the result should be basically this. This is completely red. It's controlled by one bone completely. Why? Because in this case, the bone is separated. Now here's a problem. Whoops, that to be 0. Okay. Okay, now we're fine. Let me try to see if I can find another one where there's a problem that arises. The origin of this bone is in space. Nothing ought to be influenced by it. So this, like, you could just select everything. Don't move the bones, but select everything and just set it to 0. Uncheck normalize if needed. We'll fix that later. And so here you have this issue. So you might have bones in different places that affect one shape, and maybe eventually, as you might see, what's going to happen is there's going to be some vertices that stretch out into space because they're being pulled by two different bones, and you just changed the influence in a way that isn't normalized, and that's what stretches them out. So you have to find that other bone, remove the influence from it. See if this is the right one. I don't think it is. Yeah, so this origin, I think it's like over here. Right? So this is not even supposed to do anything, I think. Okay. So that should be 0. I click on this on the other hand. Let me see. Okay, so this I think you should be able to completely highlight and select, make it red, but do not highlight, of course, other vertices of other shapes. So you'll notice that even though it normalizes checked, once I click 1, it's out there in space. That means that this region is also influenced by another bone. So we have to find that other bone, and it's here. Right? So this isn't even supposed to be affected by that bone. It's all the way up there. So we have to remove that. Denormalize if it's not clearing out. Okay, so that's changed. Now we go back to this bone, and then we can select normalized or not. Sometimes you can just, if it stretches out, you can just check normalized again, and then set it back to 1, and it'll fix. But if not, then you have to find the other bone. Okay. Now, like I said, this is a pretty nasty process. Oops. No wonder I got lazy. This is a pretty nasty process. So when you're done with that, you have to do that basically for every shape. And remember, this is only for shapes that are completely separate from the body, that are controlled by only one bone. Then you have to move on to the next one. So it's going to take a while. So once you finish with that, you might have other issues, like you can see here, the teeth kind of stretch towards the center. And you might encounter also small errors like this. See how the ribs kind of pull towards somewhere? There's the weights are not properly they're not properly painted on there. So we have to kind of manually fix that. What you can do is go back to the original model. So you go to Actronac Storm in this case, and import it, and you can delete that thing's property. Up here, go to the envelopes, and now if you click here, for example, and observe how it's supposed to look, notice it kind of has the same region, means that somewhere around here it doesn't look like it's supposed to, with respect to the both geometries of both shapes. Ought to look like this. There's another one here and another one here, right? So remember, this is torso R, torso L, torso main. Okay. So let's go back here and let's look at the teeth and see how we can fix that. So click on your mesh, whatever you're working with. I'm working with this, of course. You're not going to have the same model, but so I clicked on torso R, and let's look at what exactly is. There's a little bit of a problem here. Of course, there's a problem here, but you can notice that the teeth are not entirely affected by this bone. Maybe they ought to be, though, because actually, if you go to main, which is all the way in the center, it's like, why is this thing affecting this part over here? It's not supposed to. So what you can do is basically at that point, well, you can do two things, and it really depends on what kind of model you're working with. If they kind of ought to blend together, then you're going to have to paint weights. And you can do this one of two ways. You can, to kind of impose the maximum force, you just go to paint weights. Max strength right here is 1.0, and you just click on the area onto which you want to modify the weights, the forces. But if you want to kind of mix them together, then you check blend weights. You do the same thing, of course. If in this case maybe you don't really actually want that kind of force being imposed at all, then you're just going to have to go to your little tool here and select that area, which is the problem. As you can see here, it's erroneous, and it's pulling towards the center because that's the bone. It's in the center. That's where it's pulling towards. So you don't really want that anyway. You want the skull kind of to stay still, and the reason it's staying still here is because it's managed effectively by another bone. So let's just completely remove the influence it has here, and if If you require that you denormalize it, then you're going to have to fix that normalization later, as we discussed before. So kind of completely removed it, and you can notice it kind of has a bit of pull on the cheekbone too that it's not really supposed to. And how far does this go? It basically goes through to the entire skull, so you don't really want any of this here. Delete that. Of course, I'm sure you're using a different model, but the concept is the same. And let me just check to see what kind of a pull it's having in there. This is nasty. It is having a nasty pull over here that's not supposed to as well. So all of that actually needs to be removed. Okay, so problem now is that you actually have to reapply that force because it has to be distributed accordingly, normalized. So you have to find the bone, and this is the bone to which you want to associate these vertices with. So we're going to just paint it. So once you renormalize this, you should be able to paint on it. If it's not normalized, it's going to have a freaky reaction. So everything needs to be basically fixed if you denormalized it. If anything, if you of course, if there are two bones that need to apply force on the same shape, then you wouldn't want to have this all red. You would need to basically blend it with the painter once you fix it. Once all the vertices are normalized again, if that's what you did.